of African children, be they in DR Congo or anywhere else. And 70% of all the cobalt, as you know, does come from the DR Congo. I introduced a bill, H.R. 4443, that would look to enforce the Tariff Act, Section 307, and require an all-out effort to try to protect those children and those adults from this egregious human rights practice by the Chinese Communist Party. I did meet with our ambassador, and it was a very good meeting, Lucy Tamlin, a couple of weeks ago to the DR Congo, and I had known that they're talking about an MOU, but the problem with the MOU is just aspirational. It's like sense of the Congress or sense of the Senate language. There's no teeth in it. And I'm asking you today, you know, I know you are very much in favor, as is the administration of electric vehicles, but they should not be, the supply chain should not be contingent on whether or not we get it from the DR Congo by way of the Chinese Communist Party. Please take a look at the bill. You know, we've got to protect those kids and those adults. They are dying. We had people talk about the lung diseases that they're getting. And these kids have no health care, so they just die. And there's beatings that are occurring by Chinese Communist Party soldiers who are deployed there. And unfortunately, the DR Congo leadership just basically looks the other way because they're getting perhaps even paid off. If you could speak to the issue of the cobalt and soon the lithium that will also be coming out of the DR Congo.
Well, Congressman Smith, thank you very much for your persistent, over the years, work on all of this. You've been really tenacious and super focused on it. It was a pleasure to work with you on it before. Let me just say to you that we have an MOU with the DRC and Zambia on advancing critical minerals now, and to add processing capacity there. So we're focused on it, and I will convey your thoughts to the appropriate bureau in the department out of this, but we thank you for that.
I would appreciate that. And again, the MOU is a good idea, but it doesn't go far enough. It is all aspirational. And again, when the Chinese Communist Party is paying people, high government officials, and there's suggestions that that is happening, you know, I would love for the DR Congo to own it all and to spread the wealth that is gleaned from that to their own people.
Yeah,
instead of it all going and being processed by the PRC, where another slave labor type process takes place once it gets to China. So
Thank you.
Please take a look at the bill, and I hope you can support it.
You got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Huizenga for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Kerry. I appreciate the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to, before I get into the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment and some other projects, I do want to touch base on nuclear energy. That has been somewhat controversial. Obviously, ensuring we have sufficient baseload generation is significant. I served in the Michigan legislature, spent 6 years on the Energy and Technology Committee. I serve on the Financial Services Committee and do a lot of work with the development banks, and have over my tenure here. And I have in my district potentially one of the first projects. It's called the Palisades Power Plant in Covert, Michigan, that may be restarted. It's a program that is new. It was on the brink of decommissioning and could come back. You know, obviously the United States is working to reassert itself as a global energy leader. I think it's wise, as we saw with what was happening in Europe, that we break our own as well as our allies' dependence on energy resources of global bad actors. So I'm curious, do you believe that that projects like Palisades and others that potentially are on there would help us achieve these goals and reduce CO2 emissions? What's your view on restarting some of these nuclear power plants?
The Biden administration is very proactive on the nuclear front. We believe that that you can't really reach the targets that have been set without some nuclear.
Okay. All right. I want to, I think I've got about 3 minutes here, so I'm going to try and move quickly. COP26, you and Romanian President Klaus Iohannis pledged that Romania would build a small modular nuclear reactor project in which the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment invested $14 million. Are there any concerns that your policy and willingness to or potential willingness to forego financial viability of projects to satisfy the environmental side? I mean, are you looking at the business model as you are involved in these?
Of course, it's imperative.
Okay. All right. I want to move to a question regarding sort of your scope and authority. I think this is a new position, very new to a lot of people, including those of us that are constitutionally obligated to have oversight of those things. And I'm curious, does your funding, just making sure I understand, does your funding to fund your 45 full-time equivalents, your FTEs, as well as your salary and your travel, does that all come out of the State Department?
Yes.
Okay. Yet you do not report to Secretary Blinken, correct?
Well, sure I do. I mean,
But
he's a
it's
friend
not-
of mine.
I'm not trying to create a trap.
No,
here.
no,
I'm
no,
just
I know
trying to
you're not.
understand.
I know you're not. I'm just trying to say, formally, in terms of strict legal accountability,
Okay.
I report to the President of the United States.
Okay,
But
that's great.
informally, obviously, I keep the Secretary completely. There's only one
That's
Secretary.
That's informed, yes.
We keep him fully
And
informed.
having served
I
in that
consult
position.
with him, and
Reclaiming my time on this.
Sure, go ahead.
You certainly served in that position. In that position, you had the authority and the ability to negotiate on behalf of the United States, and had ability to bind it or speak on behalf of the president. What are the scopes of your duties with this, and under what authority are you able to go in and be able to all intents and purposes negotiate on behalf of the United States?
Well, I'm negotiating. I'm formally charged by the President of the United States and his executive authority, and the appropriate congressional notification and approval, an executive order, et cetera, that created the job. So we have had special envoys for years and years and years, and we've used envoys.
I don't think anything with quite this scope.
Well, that may be
Okay.
because of the scope of the problem.
Sure. All right. I need to hit one last thing here. In March 9, 2022, an email from the SPEC's office, Senior Director of Climate Finance, the official wrote that a call or meeting should be held with you soon, saying, quote, I would also suggest a call or meeting soon with JK to update him on FY 22 and 23, focusing on all the elements we can't put on paper. What are those elements that couldn't be put on paper?
I have no idea.
So it sounds like we need to pull him in to ask that question?
Well,
or
I
are
don't
you
know.
willing to go ask and find out
I would
exactly who's
personally, absolutely. I'm not sure what it is that couldn't be put on paper.
All right, and I know my time is expiring here, but it's my understanding that there is a FOIA request for the fiscal 2022 that State Department has said they will not be able to fulfill until 2025, April of 2025. Does that
I
sound
think
right to you?
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound right, but it sounds accurate.
Would that be acceptable?
spoke-
You and your senatorial.
No, that's not acceptable, and I believe it was an algorithm that kicked that out kind of crazily. Maybe that's a metaphor for other kinds of challenges, but no, I'm confident that I can't imagine any FOIA that would take that long.
So you'll pledge to work with us on expediting that?
Well, we will communicate to the office that you're asking and that it's important to try to get to it as soon as possible.
Mr. Secretary, I know you have travel, and we have one more member to ask questions.
Sure.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Pfluger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave onto this committee. Secretary, good to see you. I want to follow up on a couple of things. Before I get to that, I know you're traveling to China. I hope that will include touting American energy. China has rapidly produced coal plants over the past couple of years. They are concerned about baseload capacity. They are concerned about reality, and yet we have administration officials who are touting the Chinese Communist Party as the leader around the world in combating climate change, which is just incredulous and it's nonsense. So I hope that on your trip there that you'll tout American LNG. If we were to replace the coal plants that China has, we could reduce the CO2 footprint immediately overnight by about 50%.
Yeah.
So following up on my colleague here, in your position as special envoy, you made it clear that you do negotiate, on behalf of the president. But let me ask you this: do you have the authority to bind agreements?
No.
Okay, so you're negotiating, and those binding agreements are the responsibility.
They're not binding. They don't become a binding agreement unless they're ratified by the Congress, by the Senate. And it's not a treaty, mind you. It's an executive agreement. So it's binding between that administration but not beyond that.
Okay.
And it doesn't have the force of law and international law.
In this position, do you advise President Biden on energy policy?
In terms of global challenges and U.S. interest, yes.
Did you advise the president in recent months to travel to Riyadh and to ask OPEC to increase production of oil and gas?
No, I did not.
So Secretary Granholm testified before me on my primary committee in Energy and Commerce, and was a little wiggly on whether or not she was the primary advisor on energy policy for this administration.
Well, she is in regards to writ large the energy policy. Sure, she is primary.
I'm glad to hear that answer. And I'm trying to figure out who advised the president to go to Riyadh and ask for an increase in production of oil and gas. Let me ask you this. In previous times where we've had the opportunity to have you before this committee, I've asked the question, do the renewable sources of energy like wind and solar, let's just limit it to those, do they have the ability to provide baseload capacity in this country?
Backup baseload, no, but some primary they could be part of it. But can they on their own guarantee that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun ain't shining? No, that we all know.
Well, I think that's good, and I'm glad to hear that, because that's really the fight that we're...
But it could with battery, there's ways to make that work. Germany is heading to a very high percentage of renewable, others are.
I'm glad you brought up Germany. I'm actually very concerned about the path the German government has taken.
So are we.
Because this repower plan is completely ignoring nuclear, and instead of having Russian natural gas, which does provide baseload capacity, they're moving in a direction that could put them in a very bad spot with regards to baseload capacity. When we look at the administration's desire, specifically of the EPA, to have a mandate for EVs in this country, and there's a couple of different timelines. How much electricity does the United States use on an annual basis right now?
I don't know exactly where we are right now.
Okay.
I don't think
it's 4,000 terawatts. How much additional demand would we need if we got to, let's just call it 50% EV mandate, 287 million cars on the road?
Probably double.
Okay.
Not sure.
That's actually what the Secretary of Energy said. I think it's less than that. But here's my point, is that I've questioned the EPA Director, Regan, Secretary Granholm, Mr. Goffman, other high-ranking officials in the administration, and I don't believe anybody has done the math on this. And so there's multiple balls in the air here when we're talking about energy. And I don't think anybody in the administration has actually, I know nobody has done the math on this, because we can't get a straight answer. And so when you go to China and talk to the Chinese about baseload capacity and the power that's required there, I think they're doing the math on it, and they're building coal plants to meet that demand.
Actually, I don't, with all due respect, I know you represent a district that has tremendous wind and the Permian Basin and so forth, and so you have a lot of knowledge of this. But I think there was a recent article showing that it was, in fact, renewables that kind of helped Texas through the hurdle of this heat because of its reliability and where the energy comes from. But let me just say to you that I think I know the math has been done, and I know that there's a clarity that as the number of electric vehicles go up, as you electrify the country in various ways, you're going to need a lot more power. And that's precisely why the administration is trying to move on the permitting for many of the transmission lines that are essential to being able to get that power out there. So we have about 2,000 gigawatts now of potential power in the queue that is not able to be deployed. So if we can deploy more rapidly, we will fill the void. We will meet the need.
Mr. Chairman, I need 10 seconds. We are going to enter into a crisis in this country if we do not use the resources that are primary sources of energy. I am not an all of the above fan anymore. I am a best of the above fan. And Mr. Secretary, please advocate for the best of the above in this country, which starts with primary sources like liquefied natural gas that come out of the Permian Basin that I represent. And it's critical that we lead in the world, or we will be cold, dark, and
Do you also believe it's critical that they capture the emissions if they're going to make them?
these companies are doing just that. We've reduced emissions, harmful emissions, ones that are listed in the Clean Air Act.
And you believe that can be brought to scale
We have
and
scaled
be
it.
affordable?
We've scaled it in the Permian Basin. We've gone from 1 million barrels a day just 12 or 13 years ago to 5.5 million barrels a day, 43% of the total production in the United States. And in doing that, we have also reduced harmful emissions by over 40%.
Well, that's great. And look, I've had conversations with many of the CEOs of our biggest companies, asking them and trying to get fully knowledgeable about what's doable and what isn't here. The key is, folks, we've got to meet the target of the reduction of emissions that we know will help us avoid the consequences of what's happening. That's the key. And I'm not picking which way it's going to happen. I want to see it happen, and we'll go from there.
Let's use the best of the above. Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting me wave on. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pfluger. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your time today. Thank you for your answers on this committee. We do not approve of engaging in personalities with the witnesses, though it is not a rule. It's not something that we approve of. So you have our
Can I
committee.
just mention one thing, though, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
And thank you for your stewardship of this hearing, which I really appreciate. Because I didn't get a chance to answer Congressman Waltz, I think it was, whoever was asking about the airplanes.
You have a couple minutes. As long as
No,
you have
just-
time, you have a couple of minutes.
Because it's trivial in my mind, but I want to make it clear because it keeps sort of resurfacing. We are not, I have not, President Biden is not, we are not saying to people, you should not fly. That's not the message. The message is, let's find a way to be able to make sure when we fly, we're not leaving emissions that we can't capture, or we aren't capturing them, or aren't avoiding them in the first place by creating sustainable aviation fuel. So we're looking to technology to help us. And when somebody says, well, you're asking people to sacrifice this and that. No, we don't believe that this transition actually requires sacrifice. We think it will wind up making life better, cleaner, healthier, more secure. Our country will be strengthened with clean energy and some of our own supply that avoids many of these other problems. So, this battle over the airplane or whatever is kind of ridiculous and not relevant to what we're really trying to achieve here. We're not saying to people you shouldn't fly. You should fly, but let's find a way to make sure that's not contributing emissions. Just as when you drive, we don't want to be contributing emissions. Or when you have a building, buildings are a big source of emissions. We have to build them in a way that they're not contributing pollution, which is in effect what it is, in ways that hurts people. So that's our hope, that we can get on to a sort of more serious, how do we solve this problem, which I think is self-evident to anybody whose eyes are open and whose mind is open at the same time.
I appreciate your closing thoughts.
Thank you, sir.
It's just to wrap up a few thoughts for myself. I would say this. I started with some questions myself. I did not get all the answers that I want, but it is important that your office, every congressional office, that they have transparency. It's important that we know what your mission statement is, what you're trying to do on behalf of the American people, whether every American agrees with you or not. It's important for us to know those that are working in your office, what backgrounds they come from, the ways in which individuals are vetted. For me personally, there's various kinds of power that we see the United States of America wielding. When it's hard power, I think it's important that we put the fear of God into those that challenge us. When it's soft power, I think it's important that we look at every way in which that soft power may help Americans thrive or may help our adversaries, our enemies, or those that wish to rise up against us to potentially thrive and take that accordingly into account. And I hope that you do that. In that, I would just say this. I wish you well on your travels. I wish you safety on your travels. I thank you for your testimony. Other members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witness, and we would ask that you do respond to those in writing. And I will now recognize my colleague here, Mr. Crow, for 5 minutes of closing remarks, if he has any.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Kerry, for your testimony and your time here today. First of all, I just want to rebut a couple of themes that were prevalent throughout the hearing. It is wrong to say that your office and the State Department and folks that work with you and for you have been nothing but transparent. Just yesterday, you produced 700 pages of material in response to requests from this committee. And you have been, in my view, nothing but transparent and open, and including today, spending well over 2 hours answering everybody's questions, staying until the very end, and ensuring that everybody had their opportunity, and I thank you for that. It is also wrong to say that engagement with the world, including with our adversaries and those who we don't have common ground in all areas, is in any way a show of weakness. It is actually a show of strength to engage with the world and to do so from a position of confidence, right? We don't have to have this crisis of confidence where we shy away from tough conversations and tough situations, and you have shown that very clearly, and I applaud your effort, including today, going to have very hard conversations with people that we have very deep-seated disagreements with, because that's in the best interest of the American people. And it is also wrong to be the subject of personal attacks, and I'm grateful to the chairman for actually calling out that is not the course and conduct of this committee to engage in personalities, so thank you, Chairman, for mentioning that. Because you have been a public servant to this nation in a variety of capacities for your adult life, including your own military service as well, of which we find common faith and fidelity in, and I'm grateful for that. There is this saying in politics that when you can't attack the message and you have nothing to say, you attack the messenger. And unfortunately, you are at the brunt end of that today. So. We will respond accordingly, but thank you for being calm and for staying focused on the important issues. But these are substantive issues, and the American people deserve a full and robust discussion about it, and you have adequately outlined for the committee and for the American people that this is in our best economic interest. The economic future of this country relies on us making this transition. There will be more jobs, a stronger economy, a more resilient economy. That our safety relies on us making this transition and reducing our risk to flood, to wildfire, to pandemic, to crop collapse, and so many other major crises that our world and our country face. And it's in our national security interest that we make this transition, that we will be a safer and more prosperous country if we engage globally, if we win this strategic competition around the world, and we address these national security issues. So thank you for making that strong case, and I join the chairman in wishing you well on your travels, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.